Welcome to Mineral Talks Live, the monthly live mineral webinar that brings you in-depth and in-person interviews with mineral people from around the world. Mineral Talks Live is brought to you by a joint effort among the Mineralogical and Geological Museum at Harvard University, the SMMP, and Blue Cap Productions. Tune in on the first Wednesday of every month and stay connected to your mineral world. Now, broadcasting live from beautiful Honolulu, Hawaii, the land of aloha, ukuleles, and shakas, this is Mineral Talks Live. Hello and welcome to everyone tuning into our show. I want to thank you for choosing Mineral Talks Live today, the #1 mineral talk show on the internet. My name is Brian Swoboda and I make up 1/3 of the Mineral Talks Live team. My other two partners are the absolutely fabulous and indispensable Dr. Raquel Alonso Perez from the Mineralogical and Geological Museum at Harvard University and Dr. Eloise Gaillou from the Society of Mineral Museum Professionals, also known as the SMMP, and who happens to also be the newly appointed director of the Paris School of Mines. Congratulations. For those of you tuning in for the first time, Mineral Talks Live is a monthly mineral talk show that airs live on the first Wednesday of every month. We are, quite proudly, a majority female-owned enterprise, and we bring you monthly interviews with some of the best curatrix, curators, collectors, dealers, miners, researchers, artists, and media people in the gem and sometimes mineral world. Today is our 84th show since we started in the midst of the pandemic, and while we're glad that that's mostly behind us, we're thrilled that this show, this tradition, is continuing on into the future. If you happen to have missed any of our past interviews, no worries. There's a complete list of all those episodes, along with links to those interviews at the URL located at the bottom of the screen. One of the things that makes this program unique is that not only is this a live show, but it's a show where you get to interact with our guests. All you have to do to participate is to use the chat or the Q&A features, both of which are located at the bottom of your Zoom window. The chat feature allows you to instantly send messages to everyone watching the live show, so we encourage you to be as active as you'd like in the chat during the interview. And while our guests and I generally don't see your messages during our conversation, throughout the show, both Raquel and Eloise will be monitoring the chat area and will be very active there. Occasionally, they may even interject a question or comment to us during the interview, so don't be shy if you want to ask something. Also, when you first log on, we ask you to send a message to everyone letting us know where you're tuning in from so we can see how far we're reaching around the world. If you happen to have a question directly for our guests, or maybe it's a bit more detailed or needs a bit of a longer answer, go ahead and use the Q&A feature and we'll get to those questions at the end of the show. Finally, towards the end of the program, you'll see a window pop up on your screen. This is the quick fire 5 question segment to see how well all of you know our guests. This is just a fun way to get to know our guest a little bit better, so go ahead, play along. And who knows, this can be a great icebreaker when you see our guest at the next mineral show. Now, on to the show. Today we're going to do a bit of a mind flip and go into a time slip, and nothing can ever be the same. Sorry, I went into musical mode there for a second. Getting back on point, today's show is really tomorrow's show for our guest, or from his perspective, today's show is really yesterday's show. Well, coming to us live from Bangkok, Thailand, where it's just past 1 a.m. on Thursday, is the manager of field gemology based out of GIA's Bangkok office. A strong contender for the title of Best Man Bun in the industry, Mr. Time Warp himself, Wim Vertriest. Wim, how you doing, buddy?
I'm very good. Thanks so much, Brian. What an introduction. You put the bar pretty high already.
Well, Wim, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I really want to thank you for staying up late. I know these are crazy hours for you, but I totally appreciate you coming on our show and basically burning the candle on both ends for us.
Don't worry about it. I guess the crazy matches the theme of this whole podcast. I've looked at a few of them online and I've seen some previous ones. And I wish staying up till 1 a.m. was the craziest thing I've seen here.
Right on. Now, Wim, I always like to start our interviews with our guests telling us about their background. So tell us your origin story. Describe that first time a gemstone or a mineral caught your attention, and also kind of fill us in on where you grew up.
Yeah, so I think contrary to most people, I got a pretty late start in all of this. I didn't collect crystals when I was a kid. I wasn't growing up near a museum or a collector's scene. I'm from Belgium, which I found out has some cool minerals going on there, but like not really a big collector scene that I'm aware of. If you go to any world-class museum, you'll be hard-pressed to find a fine specimen in the Galleria. There are some that I've seen that are really cool, but like it's not a big thing in Belgium.
Okay.
Even most of the geology we have around there is, from an academic point, super exciting, but like just to get into it as a novice, usually pretty limited, unless you go into paleontology where we've got some cool stuff. But when I was growing up, I always thought, okay, I'm going to do something in the bioengineering field, genetics, DNA, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So during my last year of high school, we actually got like the first semester of the last year in biology, we had an introduction to genetics, and it was so dull. It was the worst. So I was kind of in a pickle because I was going to university the year after that, and I was going to do bioengineering studies, like to go into all of that, but I was like, God damn, this is actually pretty boring and like not my cup of tea. But then the last semester of that last year in high school, we had a geography earth science teacher who gave us an introduction to geology. And I remember he had one page double-sided where he basically explained a ton of concepts and he brought them all together. And I was like, this is incredible. I believe it was like how you have plate tectonics, and then you have that plate diving under South America, which gives rise to the Andes and all the mineralizations there. But it was at high school level. But it all made sense to me. So I was like, this is actually pretty amazing. Like there's a whole huge story that you can tell here with science applied to everything that's going on in the earth. So I decided to pursue that, got into geology, studied geology in Belgium at the KU Leuven. Again, geology is not a big thing in Belgium. When I graduated at my university, there were 7 other geology people with a master's in geology that graduated. So our class was 8 people, spread over 3 specializations. So we had biogeology, applied/engineering geology, because that feeds into the whole dredging scene, because the 2 biggest dredging companies in the world are both based in Belgium. And then we had the option for geodynamics and geofluids, which is what I did. And the goal was to go more into understanding metal formation or deposit formation, and to basically roll into gold exploration after that, because I did want to do something with field work. But I basically came out of that degree with a master's in geology not knowing that ruby was red and sapphire was blue. Because gemstones, I think this is something that we've seen, that I've heard Aaron Pahlke, who's my boss based in Carlsbad, he actually mentioned that as well, that he's got a super strong mineralogy, geology background. So nothing was really foreign about the whole science of gemology, except for the gems. Like all the concepts that are applied there, like I had heard about pleochroism and I had applied it during optical microscopy. I had just never applied it to a faceted stone or saw how it could, but I got all these concepts there.
Gotcha, right.
But then when I did graduate, I think in my last semester at university, there was a small elective course that was about gemstones that was taught by a guest professor at HRD Antwerp. So it was actually taught at another university that we had a partner agreement with, and they only teach it every other year. That just says how big that class was. And I think it was just 6 days, 6 Fridays, that we took the train to Antwerp to go to a classroom at HRD. And we basically got an introduction to gemology there. Obviously, it being HRD, a lab that is extremely focused on diamonds based in Antwerp. Right. Those classes were very diamond focused. So I got a whole diamond crash course there. We were able to see some amazing stuff, but not so much about colored stones. But still, there was one of the teachers there who asked, what are you guys going to do after you graduate next year? Anyone interested in doing something with field work and gemstones? So I raised my hand and she said, like, yeah, get in touch with this guy. That was Vincent, who was running the field gemology department at GIA at the time. So I reached out to him because...
Was this Vince Manson?
No, Vincent Pardieu.
Okay.
Vince Manson is before that time.
Yeah, right.
No, so he was running the field gemology department. Now, when I graduated, I still pursued that first goal of like going into metal exploration. But when I graduated, the gold price was at an all-time low. So no one was motivated to hire a junior geologist to go run around wherever and look for metal. So I had to chase something else. So I followed up on that field gemology position in Bangkok. And then a year after graduation, actually a year minus 1 week, I moved to Bangkok, started that job there basically on a probation. I was just going to try it for a couple of months. And that's 8.5 years ago now.
I love that. I love that. I mean, it's something that you just said, well, let me try this for a little bit. And then it turns into this, multi-year career for you. But let me back up a little bit. It sounds like both of your interests when you were in high school and then later in college, you were kind of pursuing a field that would answer the question of how does this happen? It seemed like you were curious about how things were formed or the origins of things. Did that manifest itself earlier in your childhood? Do you remember? Did you take things apart in your parents' house, things like that?
Not really, not from an engineering point of view. I think I always was very interested in nature. I think it helped that my dad, first of all, I traveled a lot as a kid, not to a degree that for life, but like for vacation. I was fortunate that my parents were pretty adventurous and they took me and my brother basically around the world. Around the world. We traveled in Asia, but my mom is a teacher. My dad works for the government. So both have a very long summer break. So I remember when I was 12 years old, we backpacked through Thailand, Laos, Cambodia for 6 weeks.
Oh my God, what a trip that must have been.
The year after, we did 5 weeks in northern India. The year after, we did 4 weeks in Vietnam. So that was all pretty spectacular, and that opened my eyes a lot. And then also just a strong love for nature. I think that's where that bioengineering came in. But
sure.
I never really thought that earth science could have been an option.
Right.
But I saw earth science, where it's basically we take all the science that is known and we just apply it to tell the story of Earth. Where especially when you're able to connect all these little pieces and see that whole bigger story, that's something that's super intriguing.
Well, I think that's the real exciting thing. And we're going to get into that a little bit more, where you are taking kind of the clues that you're doing out in the field and you're using that to piece together the history of, in this case, the planet.
Yeah. And I think even now, so that building that whole story of putting all these pieces together. So knowing a little bit of all these things, that's super exciting, because there's people that do earth science and go super niche on one thing,
right,
which is incredible. But that's something that I couldn't and I don't want to do. I want to sample a little bit of everything and see how it all fits together.
Sure, sure. You're kind of doing the bigger picture here, the 30,000 foot view.
And I think that's something that in my job now, I've been able to bring a lot of that in there as well. Like I'm able to do technical gemology and like analytical work, but I'm also able to connect all of that with the places where these things come from, the people that are working with it, that whole industry around it, from trading, from treating, from cutting, and why all these things, how they all connect, how they all influence each other. And that's super interesting because like I've basically been able to take it to a next level where we could see like, okay, how all these sciences of physics, chemistry, biology have an impact on Earth and how they all interact with each other there and all these different processes. Then apply that to gems, but now even look at other more soft science field, like how does that cultural evolution link to those gemstones, and put all of those stories together. And that just gives you incredible insights in some of these locations, some of these gemstones, and really lets you develop a deeper appreciation about it.
I love that. I love that. Now, all of that is kind of based, the foundation upon which all of that is built is GIA's Bangkok's gemstone collection. Talk to us a little bit about that and how GIA's kind of mission kind of all comes together into what you're doing there.
So I think most of you will probably know about GIA, so the Gemological Institute of America. We're not only in America, I'm the living proof of that. We've got laboratories all around the world. It's also not only Americans that work there, because they even have a Belgian working in Bangkok for them. But one of the main goal is to basically protect the consumer and the education that is going in there. And a big part of that is research of it. But about 15 years ago, GIA realized, I think especially when it came, when the decision was made that we were, that GIA was going to commit to doing origin determination, because GIA exists to answer questions from the trade. And I think if you pull up the next slide, that research, I think you can break it down into 3 questions. And I think for the first question is like, what is this stone? Basic identification. Still to this, like that was the original question, still super valid today. And the second thing is
that's like, what started GIA, the identification part. What is
this? I mean, that's the question that's why the first gemology was done, to basically separate, is this a piece of glass or is this a sapphire? Like then with the rise of synthetics and treatments, especially in colored stones, that became a question later on. With colored stones, I mean every gemstone that's not diamonds. Diamonds is a completely different story, because diamonds is going through that whole lab-grown phase right now. But colored stones had that. Rubies, sapphires, emeralds had that in the 80s, 90s, where that was a big issue. And they're still out there, but it's not as big an issue today. The big question that is asked right now is, where's this from? So that origin determination. So GIA committed to starting a field gemology department, with one of the goals was to basically build a library of gemstones that have a very well-known provenance, or at least that we know how well-known the provenance is. And with provenance, I refer to the actual origin of the stones, but also the treatment status, because a lot of gemstones out there are being treated, and that treatment detection is a really big thing. So building that entire collection, which has been going on for, I'm going to say, a good 15 years now, really helps the entire research team at GIA. Because that's something that I want to stress, that people that are familiar with GIA might not always know how big the research component of GIA is. Like, this is a picture that's taken during our research meeting, I think this was 2 years ago, there are some faces in there that some of you might recognize because they're very well known in the mineralogical world. I think some of them might actually be in the audience. I think I saw George Rossman log in, so he's somewhere in this picture, but also John Valley, Barb Dutro, Dr. Jeff Post from the Smithsonian. These are all very well-known figures. But you see that there's a huge variety of people with all kinds of different backgrounds. Now, there are more of our traditional backgrounds that we're familiar with, that probably most of us are, with a background in earth scientists. But there are people with backgrounds in experimental petrology, people with analytical chemistry backgrounds, people with a very strong solid-state physics background, research mathematicians, AI engineers, people that are instrument designers, software developers, all the way up to biologists working on pearl materials and other biogenic gems, and basically everything in between. So just all that research is going on at GIA, and a small part of that really uses the collection that we've built with the field gemology department. Because even if you have this all-star team of, I'm going to roughly estimate 120 people here, and you give all the equipment in the world, if they don't have any reliable materials to work on, all the work they're going to do is basically going to be rubbish to begin with. So by providing them, by supporting research with a collection that is very solidly built specifically for those purposes, we're able to deliver super strong research. And I think one of the things I want to stress here is that for field gemology, we focus exclusively on colored stones. So colored stones, everything that's not diamonds. The diamond is a completely different world, both when it comes to the trade, manufacturing, but also that research and the questions that are asked there. While for colored stones, most of the questions that are asked are very similar, whether they are rubies or sapphires or spinel or emeralds or alexandrites. The questions that are asked for them are pretty similar. Are they treated and where are they from? So that's why we focus very heavily on that colored stone, and obviously a lot on ruby and sapphire and emerald, because those are, in terms of value, in terms of market importance, still considered the big three. So that's where most of the questions are being asked, and that's where the most pressing questions need to be solved. So that's where a lot of our collection focuses on.
Right on.
Can I ask a quick question, actually, if you don't mind?
Sure.
Why can you comment on the fact that diamonds are different, especially when it comes to origin determination?
Okay, so yeah, I think a lot of it goes, when we talk purely from an earth science perspective and looking at that scientific point of view, like the diamond formation, the geology of diamonds is at such an extreme event, such extreme conditions, that a different set of rules applies there. Second of all, diamond is extremely pure, while a lot of colored gemstones, rubies, sapphires, emeralds, they're developing very near to the earth in sometimes very extreme metamorphic events, but not extreme in the way that diamond formation is extreme, which means that there's a lot more messy signatures that we can work with. Plus the way that the diamond industry has developed, they've never really put an emphasis on origin. There is a demand for it now, but that is relatively new. While for colored stones, don't ask me why, but there has been a premium for certain sources. If you have completely comparable stones, people pay a premium for source A over source B. I can't explain that. I just have to accept the way it is. But because of the formation of these gemstones, ruby, sapphire, spinel, alexandrites, there usually are signatures that we can use, that we can identify fingerprint in a convenient way, that we're able to separate different sources from each other often pretty conclusively. While for diamonds, that is not really the case. I have yet to see a convincing project that is able to separate diamonds based on the scientific signature. You can trace diamonds back to the origin, but that's what I refer to as a paper trail. If you know where your stone comes out, if you start following your stone the moment it comes out of the ground, yes, you can track it all the way to the jewelry piece. But to track it back from that jewelry piece, and you don't know where that road goes, you can't pick up the clues with science, or at least not yet. I haven't seen a single project that has been able to convincingly do it.
Thanks, Wim, because that's, I see sometimes some labs that are saying, oh, yeah, this diamond comes from this and this without tracing it back to the mine itself. Because I know, like, for example, in Canada, yes, of course, you have a tracking like this, but not knowing where the diamond comes from, it's impossible to trace it back to the lab. Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
well, thanks.
Yeah. For most diamonds, it is true. I think there are a few exceptions, but these are usually exceptional diamonds. I believe for some fancy colors, you can identify some signatures, but that is purely because they are so rare and so limited to certain sources. But I think for basically every diamond we're ever going to see, if somebody throws a diamond on your desk without any paperwork, I don't think there's a way that science can help you track it back to the source.
Thanks, Wim. Sorry, I'm stopping talking about diamonds now.
Okay. No, Eloise, I think that was perfect because Wim, I have a follow-up question on that. We're talking about localities, and there is kind of a correlation here between the gem world and the mineral world, because in the mineral world, we're always stressing the importance of keeping the labels and keeping that history attached to every specimen. And we've had on the show quite a few curators and curatrix who talk about the importance of their research collection. Now, when you're talking about the GIA gemological collection, you kind of drill down and you're a little bit more critical of recording things like the exact location, not just, some part of the world, Pakistan, but you want the exact location. And you're even talking about like the exact time of the collection in order to really create a reliable research collection. Talk about that a little bit, because I think that's fascinating. I think maybe the mineral world might be able to learn a little bit from that.
Yeah, I think I can talk about it, but there's someone else that can talk about it a lot better. So I think if you can pull up that quote, because that carries a lot more weight than when I said it. I'll just read it for all of you. But it's basically, I think it's in a video from the Natural History Museum of New York. I think that was put out in 2018 or something, where Sir David Attenborough talks about collections and what makes them reliable. And I think one of the quotes there is that a research library associated with collections is almost of greater importance than the objects, in our case, that's the gemstones themselves. Unless you know where it came from exactly and when it came from exactly, you're missing a lot of very, very important information. And that information not only comes from the object, the gemstone itself, but from the circumstances of documentation that should accompany every scientifically collected specimen. Now, the easiest way that I can summarize this is that if you go somewhere and you collect a bunch of rocks, all you have is a bunch of rocks. They can be very pretty rocks, they can be very exotic rocks, but they're still just going to be a bunch of rocks. What makes your bunch of rocks into a reliable collection is the amount of documentation that you put into it. And I think because we first of all, we have a very young collection. I think museums often build on decades, sometimes even centuries of heritage, but also baggage that you're carrying along. So because our collection only started in like about 15 years ago, we were able to really define, okay, this is what matters to us. And I think I mentioned this before very briefly, that what we really focus on is provenance. We don't care if the stone is that pretty, because it's all for research purposes. We don't care really how big it is. We don't really care how clean it is. Obviously, there's limitations to how included a stone can be to be useful for us, but that's not something we look at. We don't look at how beautiful the crystals formed, because most of this is going to be prepared in a destructive way, and some even tested in a destructive way, because this is completely dedicated to research. If it's really pretty and GIA wants it, it'll be handled by my colleagues, Terry and Mackenzie in Carlsbad, who run the GIA museum there. Because they collect materials, they have an entire reference collection, but with a very different, let me say, more classic museum approach. While our approach is really like, what we focus on most is that provenance. How sure are we where it comes from, and how sure are we that it's treated or untreated? Because these are things that are important for us, because the questions that we want to answer with this research collection, by doing research on them, is we want to know what sapphires from Sri Lanka look like. We want to know what rubies from Tajikistan look like. And if we don't know how sure we are that these stones are actually from the right place, that just puts your entire research on a very wobbly foundation. So we decided we're going to put a lot of focus on that. Like, it doesn't make your research less valuable that you're not 100% sure where your stone is from. But I think it's very important that you know that you're not sure where it's from, because that could have important consequences. If I work on a parcel of emeralds that I assume are from Zambia because somebody gave them to me as Zambian, but I found one stone that looks exactly like Colombia, I think, okay, someone made a mistake here. But if I look at the exact same parcel, but I collected it in Zambia, in the mine, hammered them out of the rock myself, and one of these emeralds that I hammered out of the rock in Zambia looks exactly like a Colombian stone, that has very different implications.
I gotcha. Sure. Yeah.
Because that would mean that there's emeralds that look exactly like Colombian material coming out of the ground in Zambia. While if I got this parcel just in the trade in Tucson, in Hong Kong, in Jaipur, wherever, we can assume like, yeah, somebody just mixed this in there. But if I collected that parcel myself, so I think that's what that reliability of provenance is super important. And I think at GIA, we use a very simple code system where we rank that reliability, where I think an A-type sample would be, so all our samples have this letter code. It's A to F. With A-type being the most reliable, it's I go to a mine, I take my hammer, I hit a rock, and a 10-carat ruby comes out. I haven't found that ruby yet, but that would have been an A-type sample. Because I took it out of the rock myself.
Right.
And a B-type sample would be like, I see someone take it out of the rock. A C-type would be, I get it from the miner at the mine, but I didn't see it come out of the ground. So that's like, I go somewhere and someone like the miner says, I found this morning.
Okay.
We're still at the mine, we're still with the miner, but like, he could have found this yesterday, he could have gotten this somewhere else. So it's already less reliable. And then D-type would be, I get it from the miner, but not at the mine. So D-type could be like, this miner's like, yeah, I got all this stuff that I found in this hole here. It's at my house. Come check it out. That would be D-type sample. And then
how many different categories do you have? How far down the rabbit hole do you go?
We go down to F. So E-type is, I get it from a trader in a local environment. So if I'm looking at tanzanites in Arusha, that would be an E-type sample. Like, we're still fairly close, but like, we're not working with the miner anymore. Right. And then an F-type would be, I get it from a trader. Technically, we refer to it as a secondary source, someone who's not the miner in an international trade center. So everything I get in Tucson is an F-type sample.
I see. Now, you don't differentiate between like, you would call it a trader, or like in the mineral world, we'd call it a dealer versus another collector. Do you?
Um, no, it's the miner or it's not the miner. Because we really want to have that connection with how close we get to the miner. So that A to F, and that really, like I said, like that example I gave of that parcel of emeralds, like if those are F-type samples and I find something that's not consistent, yeah, we can assume that it's just a mistake in the parcel.
Interesting. Okay. So by being able to classify it, you can judge its accuracy.
Exactly. You can basically judge how wrong your errors are.
Right.
Which is very important if you do science on it.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think that obviously you only want to work with A-type samples, but that's not always feasible because you can't always reach these places, these gemstone mines. So we have to rely on different degrees of samples. But because we know how reliable that is, as long as it's all consistent, you can still work with it. But it's important that you know how reliable all of that is.
God, I love that classification system that you have. Now, I think earlier you had mentioned cultural information, and I know in the David Attenborough quote, he talks about the time. I'm kind of relating those two in my mind. Explain to me why that's important and what kind of assumptions would be changed about a sample based on that.
Well, we're not really going to change assumption there, but I think when it comes to that time aspect, it's important to follow up on certain locations. Like there's a lot of things known in the gemological literature about Burmese rubies, for example. But we still go back to Burma to collect rubies there because we want to see if what's coming out now still matches that older production. And I think one case study that I can give to you, and this is a scoop, hasn't been published yet. But
you hear it live here first.
We've done a lot of work on, you heard it here first. We've done a lot of work on Mozambican rubies over the last 15 years because Mozambican rubies are fairly new, but we understand it pretty well. But still, we went back last year, collect more stones there, and we found some entirely new things that we hadn't seen yet. So if we just stuck to everything that we knew from 2012 to 2016 papers, which is when most of this information came out, we have a very nice view of it. But those new observations that we made in 2023 on the stones that we collected then, like it's important that these are added because the inclusions that we've seen now in these new production look exactly like Madagascar rubies.
Interesting.
Which has a very big implication. So following up on all these places is very important. Now, another thing in just documenting exactly where they came from, obviously when we go, when we collect an A-type sample, we're able to collect an exact GPS coordinate of where this stone came from. But nobody talks in GPS coordinates. So it's important to get names of all these places as well. So we try to go as specific as we can. Sometimes we can only say this ruby comes from Mozambique. But sometimes we can say this ruby comes from Mozambique, from the Cabo Delgado province, from the Montepuez region, from the Caraya village, from the Jamwai pit, which obviously brings a lot more information because you're basically able to pinpoint it to a GPS coordinate, which can give you a bit of an overview of like how these things are spread. Where can you find this? One of these, and that just gives you a better scale of like how big some of these regions are, how widespread some gemstones are. Because one thing that frustrates me endlessly is when I hear people talk about the Mogok mine. There is no such thing as the Mogok mine. Right. Mogok is an area of 70 by 40 kilometers. I've personally visited more than 240 mines there, and there are, I believe, 1,600 mines documented in that region that all have their own name, that all have their own specialty, that all have their own history, that all have their own suite of stones that are found there. So having that extra information there could be extremely valuable. Sometimes all you need to know is it's a Mogok sapphire. But we've done a very extensive study of sapphires from different regions in Myanmar, in Mogok, where we've basically separated it in like eight different regions, and we found some differences between them in geochemical signatures and things like that. So there's very valuable information in all of that, and being able to pinpoint it very precise.
Now, Wim, it occurs to me that one instance where the timing may be important to record is if you go back to the same location and it's years later and it's been an active mine throughout those 2 points in time, that maybe now if you find something different, it's because you've gone deeper, you've gone into like a different zone geologically. Have you found that to be true with gemstones?
Well, I think a very important thing about the gemstones that I work most with, so rubies and sapphires, is that most of that gem production comes from secondary deposits. So
interesting.
These are not, I think there are very few rubies and sapphires that are being mined directly from the host rock. So we're always working with very often extremely mature secondary deposits. I think the sapphire fields in Madagascar, the Ilakaka sapphire fields, we don't even know where the source rock of these gemstones is. It's probably completely eroded away and only the gemstones are left. Same thing in Sri Lanka. Like all these gemstones are mined from gem-rich gravels, which means that there is a certain degree of heterogeneity. There could be mixing of two different sources of sapphires in there, which means that heterogeneity, you might keep finding that and keep following that up. I think another good example is, and I think I threw some photos in there, of keeping revisiting some of these areas, is that where we looked at sapphires from Kanchanaburi, I think there's an image, the one with the excavators. That one, exactly. So this is Kanchanaburi in Western Thailand. I think the last reference that I found is from 1997, where it said all mining is basically finished. Now, this area is a 3-hour drive from me. I sometimes go hiking and photographing in the mountains that you see in the background there, because there's a huge lake there. So we decided to go over there. It's a 3-hour drive, and this is what we found. This is not exactly what I would describe as an inactive sapphire mine that hasn't produced in 20 years. These guys are pulling out kilograms of gem quality sapphires a week. Now, because we went there, we were able to collect stones there and add these in our geochemistry plot. So we were able to collect trace element chemistry on it and add that to our plots, which we use to cross-check with our unknown client stones. And you can see that all the way in the bottom here at those very low gallium stones, we had a stone that completely, I think if you go to the next image, here you can see these plot basically in the middle of nowhere. But this is a plot where the stones that I collected in Kanchanaburi in this mine that hasn't produced in 20 years, so we couldn't get any stones from it. This is a plot without these stones in it. So this stone that we analyzed, that would go out as an inconclusive origin. Now, if we go back to the other plot that I put in there, we can see that those low gallium stones, those are the Kanchanaburi sapphires that I collected there in that mine that hadn't been active for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And we see it's a one-on-one perfect match. So if we hadn't gone back to that area to actually check, is this really inactive? Is no one working here? we would have totally missed these stones. And now we're able to identify these based on the trace element signature there. So that's a good example where it means like, yeah, having those timestamps and keep going back to see what the current production looks like is extremely important.
Superb, superb. Now I know Eloise had a question for you. So Eloise, go ahead and ask your question.
Well, it was more of comments in the first place, but maybe the question was like, so I can imagine that what you have at the lab is a big map with all the dots around the entire world, pinpointing at your data. Is that correct? And is that something that you can only use at GIA? Is that something that you share?
Yeah, so all the data that we collect on our stones go into a database that is used internally. So that is it's all my colleagues at GIA that work in colored stone identification and research, they have access to it. That database is not accessible to the public because I think, yeah, you guys are all familiar with it, that like if you collect data, methodology is a super important thing. Like it's very difficult to compare trace element signatures if you don't use the exact same method. So that's one of the reasons why we're not sharing any of this data publicly. We have shared some of that data on request with other academic groups. I think Raquel actually got some emerald data and actual emeralds from us for a project that she was working on a couple of years ago. But yeah, right now that information is all used internally only. And speaking of the map that I have in my office, I think Brian actually has a picture of it that he could pull up as well, which I think would be interesting to look at. Because this shows the locations where we've collected samples, where we've done expeditions, and I think this also highlights a very different approach to mineral collectors, because some of the most important mineral regions for specimen collectors, they're not on here. Mm-hmm. Like you see, there's a very heavy focus on East Africa, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia, because these are the main ruby and sapphire producing areas in the world. I think the color code on this map speaks for itself with green, blue, and red. The black dots refer to, in Australia, those are the opal fields. In Ethiopia, also the opal fields. In Brazil, the Paraíba tourmaline mines. And in Russia, the Alexandrite demantoid mines in the Urals. But all the rest is ruby and sapphire focused and emerald focused, because those are our main targets. And most of these places are secondary deposits. So there's the link with the original host rock has completely been cut. So we're just collecting this for gemological studies. Where we can, we collect more with an eye on more geological matrix studies as well, but that's very limited. And at this point in time, we don't have an extensive collection on that. It is growing, but we also don't have the capacity to work on a lot of that.
Cool, thanks for sharing. That's awesome.
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and launch the poll. So if you see a window pop up, you can go ahead and close that. But this map brings up kind of another interesting topic I'd love to discuss with you, which is tell us about some of your collecting field trips. I think that would be very, very interesting for our viewers and for myself.
Well, yeah, I think if you're asking me for a couple of my favorite places that I've been able to collect, gemstones. There's two places that I love purely because of the name that they have. One of them is in Vietnam, northern Vietnam, the area where a lot of the ruby and especially spinel mining is happening. And this is a picture taken from the valley where you're looking up at this hill. And it's actually, you've got this entire flank is covered in white marble, which is all the debris that the miners are pushing down. So that is pure white marble that doesn't contain rubies and spinels. The actual mining is happening where that black stained white marble is in the background under that jungle cover. But that's about like a 90-minute grueling climb to get up there. Pretty cool. But the name of this place is, and I apologize to any Vietnamese speakers in the audience because I'll probably curse some families while saying this. It's named the Cung Troi mine, which apparently translates to the gate to heaven, because it's this white opening on the mountain on top of it, which I find an incredibly poetic name. And this is a location where a lot of those carvings of spinel and ruby and pargasite and clinohumite in marble, that they make these exquisite carvings with these gemstones still in the white matrix. That's all coming from this mine. So these guys, actually, when we were there, these guys carried a block of 120 kilograms of marble that had entire veins of spinel running through it. They were carrying it down on a bamboo stretcher, basically, across these jungle paths, through crevices. This is marble. There's caves and things in there. It's a pretty special location. The other location that I absolutely love because of the name, I don't have a picture of it because I only thought about it 20 minutes ago, that I really should bring this up, is an area in Mogok where one of my favorite gemstone mines, mostly producing blue sapphires in the southwestern part of the Mogok Valley, is an area that is called Yadana Kade Kadar. First of all, even if you don't understand what it means, I think it sounds beautifully.
Yeah, it rolls off the tongue very well.
Yeah, but the Burmese translation is millions and billions of gemstones, which I think is perfect. Which is a very good name for a gemstone. So yeah, I think those are two of my favorite gemstone mining areas. And then actually one of my favorite places that I've been able to visit, that is not really a mine, but that is also very important for field gemology, is trying to understand that trading, because it's obviously going and collecting these stones is one part, but for field gemology, it's also one of the things we do is seeing what's going on there, documenting that, trying to tell that story, because there's a lot of people now that want to know, what does this place look like? People walk into a jewelry store and ask for a Burmese ruby, but they couldn't even point Burma out on a map.
Right.
But if you're able to show these people, look, this is what Mogok looks like, or this is what Mozambique looks like, or this is what Tanzania looks like, this is how these people work with these stones, this is how this is ingrained in that culture, this is what emeralds mean in Colombia. That is such a strong argument, and it's such a beautiful story and part of the value of that gemstone, that's a very important part of field gemology, to bring that information out there as well. So one of my favorite places in the world is the jade market in Mandalay. The jade market in Mandalay is where a lot of not the high-end jade, but a lot of the utility grade jade is being traded. And it is, I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. It is one of my favorite places in the world because the whole atmosphere there, it really hits you on, like, it speaks to all the senses there. First of all, you can see, like, this market happens in the middle of the night. So the rough jade market starts at around 2:30 a.m. and lasts until sunrise. Why is that? Because there is no external light source that could influence your judging. So you have perfect control of your light with your torch with your flashlight that you are using to check the transparency, the clarity, the color of the jade. Another thing is, if you see these piles of jade, if you move your hands through it, when these pieces hit each other, they make the most exquisite, pure, high-tone sound. So it's all these little tinkling bells that you hear all around you of people just rustling through that jade. On top of that, the entire feel of it, you're in a tropical country. It's blistering hot in Mandalay. It is extremely humid. But at night, it really is one of those like nice, pleasant, hot summer eves that you sometimes get after a thunderstorm, where you can feel the air is heavy, but it is still a bit refreshing. But you can feel that the heat of the day, it's going to fall down upon us at any minute. But right now, it's really pleasant. You have all the smells going on there as well. The famous cigarettes, cigars, the cheroots that they hand roll, these big, smelly, very heavy tobacco that is just hanging all over that place. There are people cooking breakfast there, which is a very pungent fish soup that they traditionally eat there, the mohinga. So it's all these sounds and smells. And then plus on top of that, jade is a very tactile gemstone. When you see jade, you can almost, you want to touch it. You want to feel how smooth it is. You really want to, it's a gemstone that begs to be touched. So it really speaks to all the senses if you just go to that market and just walk around there and experience it. Because I can close my eyes now and I can hear that market.
Sure,
I can smell that market. So it's an absolutely magnificent place that I'm super happy that I've been able to visit on a number of times. But you do have to set your alarm pretty early to go there.
Yeah. No, when I was filming the Mogok film with Barlocher, I think back in 2013, we spent a day filming in Mandalay, the jade market, and we didn't go at the hours that you went. We were there during the day, but I never released that footage just because it didn't belong in the Mogok film because it's out of the Mogok Valley. But it was an incredible experience. So you articulating your memories of it just brings all that footage crashing back down into my kind of the little movie screen in my head.
Yeah, absolutely.
Super.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite places. I don't know, did I send any other photos of places that I was going to talk about? I don't remember the pictures I will send.
Yeah, you sent one more photo, and I'm going to bring this up right now. And I know that this is the ending photo, the last photo, but absolutely incredible.
Yeah, so, this is actually a good one, too. This is a picture that I took in northern Tanzania. We were there in the Umba Valley. Now, for those of you that are familiar with the Umba Valley in Tanzania, it's a location where a lot of fancy colored sapphires were found. It is the place where the term African Patparacha was cornered, because Umba Valley produces the entire rainbow of colors. But what made Umba special was these very deep yellow, orange, reds, and all these mixes in between. And it was amazing because we were sitting there watching the sunset, which is better than the opening scene of the Lion King movie. It was better to see it in real life.
Yeah.
But at that time, I was sitting there with a friend who was joining us on that expedition, and we were watching the sun go down, and we realized what we're seeing right now in front of us is exactly what's buried under our feet as well. These are the ultimate Umba sapphire colors that we're seeing in front of us. And it was such a great experience that we were able to see this incredible natural beauty all around us. And then realizing the reason we're actually here is exactly those colors as well.
Superb, superb. Wim, thank you so much. We're now at the point of the show where we're going to do the quick fire 5. So in case you're not familiar with this, a poll went up and there are 5 questions. Each question has 2 answers. And the viewers have already seen these questions and they're trying to predict how you will answer. All of your answers are correct. There are, again, 2 answers to each question. You tell me which answer you resonate with most strongly, and we'll see how the viewers did against your choices. Does that make sense? Okay. Question number 1: gemstones or minerals?
Well, gemstones. That was an easy one.
Yeah. It gets progressively more difficult.
Okay.
Question number 2, ruby or sapphire?
Ruby.
Ruby, okay. Question number 3. Remember, these get more and more difficult. Favorite food, steak and fries or mussels and fries?
Mussels and fries.
Oh, yes. Question number 4. Again, harder and harder. Red wine or Trappist beer?
Trappist beer all the way. Is this even a question? They'll take away my passport if I answer this wrong.
That's exactly right. That's why I said these get harder. Final question. This may be a little bit obscure. Favorite wind instrument, saxophone or clarinet?
Saxophone.
Saxophone. That was the correct answer. That was the one where there actually was one correct answer. Okay, let's see how the viewers did. Eloise, are you ready with our viewer answers?
Actually, I'm trying to find the poll right now on this thing, so maybe Raquel is more ready than me.
Sure, I have them.
Okay, Raquel's ready.
Fantasy.
All right, question number 1, gemstones or minerals? Without hesitation, Wim said gemstones. All the viewers better have gotten this right. What did the viewers say?
88% of the viewers.
Okay, that's right. Good enough. That's good enough. Gemstones, that is correct. Question number 2, ruby or sapphires? And Wim predictably went with rubies. What did our viewers say?
Rubies.
Rubies. Okay, and before we go on to question number 3, Wim, I'm going to ask you to talk about this photograph right here of this ruby. And is that your hand?
Yeah, that's my hand.
Okay.
Here it is for scale. This is actually a pretty amazing stone. And I'm glad that you brought it up because like seeing this stone was an incredible experience for me. Working with gemstones, it is sometimes very surreal. People pay millions of dollars for these kind of things, and it's hard to say why. Because $1 million, like I don't even know what that is. Like that number is so big, like I don't know how many cheeseburgers is that even. How many cold beers do you get for $1 million? Like I wouldn't know.
How many plates of mussel and fries?
Exactly. Like it's such a large number, and it's like these estimates that people like that money that people pay for gemstones is just like it's an awful lot. But that number is so big that I couldn't really grasp it, which means that like I couldn't understand why people were so attracted to gemstones. Like sure, they're a pretty rock, but it's a pretty rock. But when I saw this stone, for me, I understood. When I saw this stone, I realized what a gemstone with a capital G was. And that was a very big realization for me, where I finally understood what a ruby was. A ruby with a capital R, like a fine gemstone, something of beauty that makes you feel a lot of feelings. And it's more about that stone as well, because objectively speaking, this is not the most beautiful ruby I've seen. But it was everything about the atmosphere where I saw it. Because for those of you that are familiar with rubies and sources and perception in the trade, it might surprise you that this is actually a Cambodian ruby, which a lot of people consider inferior. It is a 16 karat, so it's quite a big stone. But where we saw this stone was with a miner that had been working in Cambodia for 30 years, 35 years. I'd visited him a couple of times. The most amazing little man, very generous, always invites us into his house, shares fruit from his backyard, and he's always shown us nice stones. But we were there with this group, and he tells his wife something in Khmer, and his wife gives him this strange look, and they argue a little bit, like, we're like, okay, what's going on here? But finally, she goes upstairs to the bedroom. So this stone is not kept in the safe. And I really hope he just keeps it under his pillow. That's what I keep telling myself. She goes upstairs and comes back with this stone. And she puts it in the middle of the table, this huge teak wood table. She puts it in the middle of the table and like everything goes quiet. The birds outside stop singing. There's no more wind. And everyone just like looks at the stone. Like I'm getting goosebumps now talking about the stone.
Yeah.
Because when I saw that stone, I realized this is what a gem should be. Like I had seen amazing rubies before that, but those were just really nice, expensive stones. But when I saw this stone, I realized this is what medieval warlords conquered kingdoms for.
Sure, yeah.
Like this is why the Black Prince did what the Black Prince did. And this is the first ruby. This is the ruby that for me made it understand what gemstones are, because they're more than just pretty expensive rocks. And it's impossible to describe until you see your gemstone with a capital G, until you see your ruby with a capital R. And I apologize to Raquel already. I haven't seen my emerald yet, so emeralds do very little for me. I've seen my blue sapphire. I haven't seen my Patparacha sapphire yet, so Patparachas don't do a lot for me. But I'm sure it's out there. One day I'm going to see the Patparacha sapphire, and I'm going to realize what Patparacha sapphire is supposed to be. So that's this quest that I think we all should be on, is to see that one stone that makes us realize this is what it's about. And for me, it was that ruby that made me understand what gemstones and rubies are about.
Wim, I love your articulation of that feeling, that experience for you. Peter Bancroft, who was very big in the mineral world, with his book, Gem and Crystal Treasures. He wrote numerous books, but he would often talk about mineral collecting as something that does good for your soul. And so as you were talking about your reaction to seeing this emerald, or this ruby rather, excuse me, it just brought back Uncle Pete's words to me about moving your soul, and that's exactly what happened to you with that ruby. So let's hope that the emerald is in your near future.
I hope so too.
No, I don't mind if it doesn't. We could make a good team. Elo is the diamonds. Wim is the rubies and sapphires. We don't speak to me much. And
exactly, because you haven't seen that ruby or sapphire yet. But it's out there, and like one day you're gonna see it, and then you're gonna fall in love with it.
I have seen an amazing pot, Patparacha.
Yeah,
but ruby sapphire,
and it's extremely personal as well. Like this, like what this ruby did for me, and like I'm pretty sure there were other people in the group that were, man, it's another big, really nice ruby, but like didn't do anything for it. But that's the beauty.
That's to me the fascinating part, how it can be so personal to one person, yet have no effect to the other people in the same room.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
Okay, shall we carry on?
Yeah, let's finish the quick fire 5. The last 3 questions have more to do with Wim's background in Belgium. So, favorite food, steak and fries or mussel and fries? These are 2 very popular dishes in Belgium. Wim went with mussels and fries. What our viewers say?
Oh, steak and fries by a little bit.
Fries, just by a little bit. Okay, well, close enough.
Almost.
Number 4, red wine or Trappist beer. Without skipping a beat, Wim went with the Trappist beer. What did our viewers say?
They agree with him.
Ah, super. And Trappist beer, yeah, as I understand, the Trappists are a group of monks that they're the only ones allowed to make this beer, and the majority of them are in Belgium. Is that sort of close?
Yeah, so it has to be brewed in the monastery under supervision of the monks, and the monks have to be of a specific order, and they can't make any profit on it. And I believe there are 9 or 10 out there. I believe there's one in the US, there's one in France, and I think there's 6 in Belgium. There's one in Austria, I think, and there might be one in Belgium that just lost its status because I think they are no longer producing in the monastery. They're still making the same beer, but it's no longer produced on the monastery grounds, so they lost their special Trappist status. There's a set of rules. They're all incredible.
Okay, I was going to ask you, how is a Trappist beer?
They're very rich.
Okay.
No, they usually make a couple of varieties, but yeah, they tend to be, they're Belgian beers. You don't drink them because you're thirsty.
Wim, next year in Tucson, you got to come by the office. I'm going to make sure that I get some Trappist beer in there, and I'll save it just for you.
Like, everyone make a note of this.
And then we'll post pictures when I make it happen.
Deal.
All right. Final question. Favorite wind instrument, saxophone or clarinet? You went with saxophone. Again, the correct answer. In a moment, I'll tell everyone why. Raquel, what did our viewers say?
Saxophone.
Saxophone. And the reason that was the correct answer is this, and this is a little tidbit of information of trivia. Apparently, the sax was invented by a Belgian gentleman named Adolphe Sax. That's how it got its name. Yeah, so correct answer. All right, we're going to go to the Q&A section. I'm sure there are plenty of questions from our viewers. Wim, if you still have time and if you can still stay awake, please hang out.
I'm still here.
Excellent.
So, Elo, I don't know, there were many questions throughout the chat. The chat was really active. And one of the earliest one I got was, if you don't mind repeating the classification A through F. Yeah,
so I'm going to start with, you can find these things online. They've been, if you go to GIA's website, there's a Gems and Gemology issue, so the quarterly journal of GIA, which you can all get for free. I believe the winter 2019 issue is completely dedicated to origin determination. And there is an article in there where we really line all of these things out. So where we give the full description. So basically A is collected by the GIA gemologist. B is GIA gemologist has seen the stone come out of the ground. C is collected from a miner at the mine. D is collected from the miner, not at the mine. And then E is from a trader near the mine. And F is from a trader or like not the miner, a secondary source, not the person who took the stone out of the ground. So E is from a secondary source near the mines, and F is a secondary source anywhere else.
Okay, thank you. And another question I remember, someone was asking why on your map you don't have any green dots of the emeralds from North Carolina, and I assume also California, which I think I reply because I know I got samples from you guys, so I know you do have, but not necessarily why they were not on your map.
Yeah, so because we haven't really done a field expedition to collect there. We have this material because thanks to the very lively American collector scene, there are relatively reliable samples available within these scenes. So I think when it comes to California and North Carolina emeralds, and I think most of the other North American gemstones, these are from a gemstone point of view, these are usually more in the collector spheres. Most of the value in that material is not because of their objective beauty as gemstones. Most of that value is in that location, which means that they're following more the laws of mineral and collectors stones, not as luxury gemstone products, gemstone jewelry products. Also, because the mining is not really active. Plus, we don't really have an issue with them. Remember, like, field gemology exists to support GIA research, which exists to support GIA services. So if all of a sudden we see tons of emeralds come through the lab that we can't identify where they're from, and we assume that they're from North Carolina, yeah, we'll go to North Carolina to collect samples there to make sure that our collection is up to date. But right now, that is not really a priority because we know that there's not a lot of production there. These stones are not coming through the lab for identification, for an origin determination service. While all the other dots on that map are actually being commercially traded as gemstones. Yeah, some of them more than others. Some of them are more anecdotal, more historical than others. But that's why some of these, like not every corundum locality or emerald locality is on that map, because a lot of these locations are more anecdotal and don't produce economically viable gemstone volumes. Like, for example, like we've never been to the Canadian emerald deposits because we've never really seen Canadian emeralds come through the lab that were a problem for us.
Yeah. While we're still on the emerald, someone asked, where is the emerald that you have on the background?
That's a Colombian piece.
And they question Muso, and I think it looks like by the matrix. So
you'll know that better than I do.
No, you also, so just for the viewers, even if GIA released the data, and like currently working with Aaron Palkey, so we have data, and then they're gonna be published. So it's just the commercial data, that's what has limitations, but anything that is on research is publicly available.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of data that we've published in GIA's journals, in other peer-reviewed journals, some of them very specifically gemologically, others a bit more towards what I refer to like the academic level, like American Mineralogist and things like that. But a lot of it in Gems and Gemology, Journal of Gemology. A lot of it's also on GIA's website as standard internal projects, which we publish a lot of material about. So there's a lot of information available there. I don't know how useful that is for the strictly speaking mineralogical world, but there is a lot of overlap there. So there is a very heavy focus on inclusion photography. There is a very heavy focus on trace element chemistry of corundum and emeralds. And then spectroscopy is usually limited to confocal Raman spectroscopy to identify some solid inclusions. FTIR spectroscopy, but not so much for identification purposes. That is usually for treatment detection that we apply that. And then there is, UV vis spectroscopy is a very important one in certain projects where we look at the causes of color, and especially when it comes to treatment projects, the changes in causes of color that we can really specifically analyze the chromophores and how these chromophores change within a deposit, but also change in the same stone over treatment. So a lot of that information, yes, is publicly available. And like I mentioned before, I think like Raquel repeated, if an academic group comes up with a good reason that they want to use this data, up till now, I don't think we've ever said no to sharing any of it. So that entire collection is being opened up to academic groups. More and more people are sending us requests to borrow some of these stones, because that's one of the strengths of this collection, that it is a gemstone collection. And I think we have an incredible collection now. I think our research collection is over 27,000 pieces at this moment. And a lot of academic institutions usually have a lot of manpower, a lot of analytical capacity, and a lot of interest in gemstones, because let's face it, they're the sexiest minerals and geological products on the world. But they don't always have access to it. Like a lot of museums, a lot of universities, they have incredible collections of materials that are local, that are from the nearby areas, materials that are more abundant. But corundum is pretty rare, especially if you want to compare different sources. And even if you want to study it, if you want to, as an academic institution, you want to study, for example, alexandrites, you'll need a pretty big grant to put that collection together. While at GIA, we've made that collection already, and under certain terms and conditions, we can definitely collaborate on that, because we've got so much stuff that we can't do everything on it, and you probably want to do different things on it. So it's very complementary. I think an example, like I think with Raquel, that you wanted to do some destructive testing on some emeralds and see how that related to non-destructive testing. Super cool project. We're never going to do this, but our collections here are like, we can spare 10 little chunks of crumbly emerald for this. And that was an amazing project. So we're seeing more and more of this happening with academic institutions.
You know, I'm glad not many people dissolve or destroy that many emeralds as we did. But the results were incredible, so that was worth all those emeralds fully. We have a couple more questions, Anelo, maybe you have after me. Someone asked who pays for all those field trips and acquisition of gems. They thought it would be GIA, and that's the case, but just if you want to.
So that's GIA. We get a budget there from the research department that is included there. So yeah, that just comes out of the GIA research budget. Again, the samples that we buy are usually not extremely valuable in the gem trade. We usually focus on the materials that most people don't want, because we like the inclusions. We want all of that, which typically comes at a discount. We like the super flat stones because we're gonna polish them into optical wafers anyway. So we are not really in competition with the gemstone buyers when it comes to most of these things. So we're not shopping for these prices that you see at the AGTA show in Tucson. We're buying a lot lower grade material, like the full mine run of something where maybe there's one stone that you could possibly, if you close your eyes a little bit, get a decent gem out of. But these materials they're still the same corundum, they're still colored the same way, they still have the same inclusions as the top material, but they obviously come at a huge discount. So it's not that we throw crazy amounts of money at this collection. Most of the effort actually goes into making sure that we know how reliable the origin and the provenance of this material is.
Great. And then someone from the audience also wanted to know what's the weight on the ruby you had. I think you mentioned about 15 carats?
Yeah, it's over 15 carats. I think it's 16 something carats. And it was almost loop clean. It had one tiny fracture near the girdle. Incredible ruby.
Hello, Brian, any other question that might have missed from the chat?
I saw a chat question run by where someone was asking about localities that you visited in the past that you are no longer able to visit. And I know we talked about that before we started the show. So when maybe you can share that with the audience.
Yeah, there are some places that just are not accessible anymore. Right now, it's not a great time to go to Myanmar. Going to Mandalay right now, I think on paper I could, but every Burmese friend I have tells me it's a terrible idea. Don't do it. So that obviously plays a big role. I think also Afghanistan, not the place to be right now. Well, I think Afghanistan 10 years ago was opening up, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, was opening up and becoming more accessible. But going now obviously presents logistic, but also ethical dilemmas in going there. For example, another thing is like we were fortunate to visit the Russian emerald and alexandrite mines in 2020. Right now, that would be a big no-no as well. Also, because that the emerald mines have been renationalized, and they are basically fully geared towards beryllium metal production again. Because beryllium is a strategic beryllium metal is a strategic has strategic value, and emeralds don't. So that entire ore body of beryl mineralization and beryllium mineral mineralization is all being exploited for beryllium metal production at this point. So even if technically there is no emerald mine in Russia at the moment, because there is no emerald mining. So all these things change very quickly, very fluidly. I think if you go to sapphire mines in eastern Thailand, there is still some sapphire mining going on, but that rotates very quickly. Because that land is extremely valuable for agricultural crops. So they mine it, and after a year they replant it, and it's turned into a fruit plantation again. So going to the same mine, going to that exact same GPS coordinate, you'd be standing in the middle of a durian or a mango plantation now, where 3 years ago it would have been an open pit sapphire mine.
Okay.
So yeah, you can't go back to that same hole. So there's always a lot of different challenges. That's why it's important to keep going back, to take the opportunities when you can. Like, I think, Brian, you mentioned that you went up to Mogok in 2013.
Right.
Visiting Mogok has been a very short window that foreigners were actually allowed there. And I think you and me, we've both use that opportunity to go up there, but right now we can't go collect any A, B, C, D type samples from Burma.
Right. I don't think the film that I ended up making is not a film that I think I'd ever be able to make in my lifetime again.
Yeah. I have the same thing. Like, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to go back to Burma. I have some incredible memories there, made some incredible friends and unbelievable experiences. But yeah, I'm glad I have those, because I don't know if I'm going to be able to go back to that.
Right. Terrific. Thank you. Raquel, Eloise, any other questions or comments from our viewers that we can share with Wim?
I have a comment. Otherwise, comparing databases between what the database that you have and compared with the museum database, especially a School of Mines museum, the purpose of the School of Mines to begin with was to collect at the deposit exactly what you were doing. But that was back for us 230 years ago, up to, I would say, up to 80 years ago, or sometime 50 or 60 years ago. And then we lost the money to actually be able to go. And on top of that, there were so many places that we had to go to find all the products that it was too much. I mean, it would have been too many people going all around the world all the time. And eventually we just said, okay, we're gonna go in one place in the world, 2 places. We're gonna go to all the shows, and we're gonna make our life easier and find the products in only 1 or 2 places around the world. But at the same time, as you were saying, by doing that over the last 70 or 80 years, we lost that great tracking that we used to have back in the days. So I think it's super important. You have to focus on a very few species. To the opposite of us, we have to cover the entire mineral world. So that's really hard. But I'm glad that at least for those few species, some people are still doing that, and I hope that, you know, keep that very preciously, especially especially for the museum. You were saying, well, the museum is pretty and you have your part that is more research focused, but that's what a museum is. There's the pretty side and there's the importance of the collection on the background used for researchers. So I think that's really good that you guys are doing that. And I know that other labs in the world are trying to do that as well. So keep on the good work. That was my comment.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, Wim, thank you so much for your time. I know it's we're getting close to, I think, 2:30 over there. So really, really appreciate you coming on the show. To all the viewers out there, thank you for tuning in. Tune in again 4 weeks from today. April 3rd is going to be our next Mineral Talks live show. Until then, live life with aloha, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you so much.